The thermometer read -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Obergefreiter Klaus Richter watched his breath crystallize in the T-34's headlight beam. The Panzer III beside him hadn't moved in 6 hours. Engine block cracked like an eggshell. Track pins shattered from the cold. The MG-34 in the cupola was a sculpture of ice and useless metal. Richter's hands were wooden stumps inside his gloves. No winter feld blues, no winter boots, just canvas and cotton, and the promise that Moscow would fall before the snow. General Quartiermeister Eduard Wagner had calculated for 6 weeks of summer war. Ammunition took priority. Fuel took priority. Winter gear sat in Polish depots, while German boys froze to death in Russian mud. The Opel Blitz trucks were graveyards now. Canvas tops like tissue paper against the Siberian wind. Drivers found frozen to their steering wheels. Frostbite cases mounted by the hundreds. 500 in Richter's sector alone. The Wehrmacht's technological superiority had become its weakness. Every advantage turned liability in the killing cold. Panzer Group II reported 50% immobilization rates, tracks cracking, lubricants solidifying, engines seizing solid, the vaunted German war machine eating itself one frozen component at a time. Horse and vehicle attrition hit 30% in the first month. Barbarossa was bleeding to death in the snow. Soviet Guards rifle divisions watched from their winter positions. They had planned for this, expected it. The T-34s moved like ghosts through the drifts, while German panzers sat helpless. Ski troops appeared and vanished. Rifle grenade teams struck at ranges under 200 yards against immobilized targets. The hunters had become the hunted. Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov pressed his eye to the periscope. 460 German tanks had operated on this axis during the breakthrough. Now he counted perhaps 50 still mobile. The fascist war machine was dying before his eyes, not from Soviet bullets, but from General Winter himself. "Look at them," Volkov whispered to his gunner. "They're mighty panzers, frozen solid like iron coffins." The German tanks that could still move crawled at walking pace, tracks slipping, engines coughing. The MG-34 machine guns jammed after 3 rounds. Soviet infantry closed to grenade range against targets that couldn't traverse their turrets fast enough to engage. Volkov's T-34 had been running for 8 hours straight. Soviet steel, Soviet engineering. Built for Russian winters, while the Germans built for Polish summers. The irony was perfect. The fascist invaders defeated by their own arrogance. Back in the frozen Panzer III, Richter tried to work the bolt on his carabiner 98K. The metal burned his fingers through his gloves. The rifle was solid ice. Around him, German soldiers huddled in shell scrapes, sharing body heat, waiting for supplies that would never come. The Soviet gauge railroads had crippled German logistics. Different. Track widths. No rolling stock compatibility. Supply lines stretched across 1,000 kilometers of mud and snow. Wagner's shoestring operation snapped under the weight of Russian winter. Guderian himself had called supply woes the main cause preventing Moscow's capture. The short summer war had become an extended nightmare. German tactical superiority paralyzed by quartermaster incompetence. The machine was eating itself, one frozen bolt at a time. The MG-34 froze solid at -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Obergefreiter Klaus Brenner learned this when his machine gun locked mid-burst during a Soviet counterattack near Tula. The bolt mechanism seized. The firing pin wouldn't strike. 300 rounds per minute became 0 rounds per minute in the space of a heartbeat. Brenner died with his hand still gripping the weapon's stock. General Quartiermeister Eduard Wagner had designed his logistics for a 6-week summer campaign. The Wehrmacht rolled into Russia with canvas-topped Opel Blitz trucks and summer-weight lubricants. When October brought the first frost, tank tracks cracked like glass. Panzer III and IV engines wouldn't turn over. Hydraulic fluid turned to paste inside transmission systems that had conquered France 18 months earlier. Guderian's Panzer Group II reported 50% immobilization rates by November. 460 tanks became 230 operational vehicles overnight. The vaunted German war machine hemorrhaged effectiveness, while Soviet T-34s rolled through snow that stopped German panzers cold. The Russians had expected winter. Their tanks carried antifreeze. Their crews wore felt boots and quilted jackets. Their weapons functioned at temperatures that turned German equipment into expensive sculpture. Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov commanded a guards rifle company defending the approaches to Kashira. His men watched German panzer crews abandon their vehicles rather than freeze inside steel coffins. The mighty Wehrmacht, conquerors of Europe, reduced to huddling around burning trucks for warmth. The fascist tanks could not move, Volkov wrote in his combat report. Their engines would not start. Their guns would not traverse. We attacked with rifle grenades at ranges under 200 yards. They could not respond effectively. The sight terrified German survivors more than Soviet artillery. Panzer crews who had rolled through Poland and France now watched their Tiger tanks become immobile pillboxes. The mechanical superiority that had defined German tactical doctrine evaporated in temperatures that Soviet equipment handled routinely. Wagner's supply trains carried ammunition and fuel. Winter clothing sat unused in Polish depots, while German soldiers developed frostbite at rates exceeding combat casualties. Over 500 cases in single sectors. Entire companies rendered non-effective not by enemy action, but by inadequate preparation. Soviet ski troops exploited the paralysis ruthlessly. They moved through forests where German vehicles couldn't follow. They struck supply columns protected by trucks that wouldn't start, and crews too cold to fight effectively. The Red Army's first decisive advantage came not from superior tactics, but from superior logistics. Supply woes as the main cause of hardship preventing advances toward Moscow, Guderian reported. His shoestring logistics had collapsed under extended lines and Russian winter. The German gauge railroad system couldn't handle Soviet track widths. Supplies stacked at border crossings, while frontline units starved for fuel and spare parts. Canvas truck covers provided no protection against wind that cut through German uniforms like razors. Modern doctrine met ancient enemy. Cold won. The Wehrmacht's technological superiority meant nothing when the technology wouldn't function. Steel became glass. Engines became blocks of ice. The invincible German war machine learned that Russia's greatest defender wasn't the Red Army. It was winter itself. The canvas tore like wet paper. Hauptmann Erich Zimmermann watched his driver's hands turn white on the steering wheel. The Opel Blitz lurched to a halt. Steam poured from the radiator grill. "Engines seized," Gefreiter Hans Müller said. His breath came in sharp clouds. "Coolant's frozen solid." Zimmermann checked his watch. 0615 hours, minus 32 degrees Celsius. The third truck in his convoy had died in 20 minutes. Behind them, Wehrmacht infantry huddled in cargo beds, their Feldblues jackets useless against the Siberian wind cutting through canvas covers like they were tissue. The trucks had become death traps. Canvas tops designed for French summers offered no protection. Men pressed against metal surfaces lost skin to frostbite in seconds. The heating systems had failed when antifreeze supplies ran out in December. Now the vehicles were mobile freezers, carrying their crews toward hypothermia at 30 kilometers per hour until the engines died. "Abandon the vehicle," Zimmermann ordered. "Form up on foot." Muller's eyes went wide. "Sir, the nearest supply depot is 18 kilometers. Then we walk 18 kilometers. From the ridgeline 800 meters north, Junior Lieutenant Alexei Petrov watched through his PSO-1 scope. The German column had stopped. Steam rose from 3 separate vehicles. Men climbed down from cargo beds, moving like old men, their joints stiff with cold. Petrov had seen this pattern for weeks. The fascist war machine was freezing to death. Their vehicles died in the cold. Their weapons jammed. Their men moved slower each day, weighted down by inadequate gear, and the crushing realization that their summer war had become a winter nightmare. He keyed his radio. "Ski Patrol, this is Observation Post 7. German column immobilized. Grid reference 478239. Approximately 40 infantry. No armored support." "Understood, 7. Moving to intercept." Petrov watched the Germans form a ragged column. They left their trucks where they stood, engines smoking in the Arctic air. Some men tried to carry equipment. Within minutes, they began dropping ammunition boxes, field radios, spare parts. The weight was too much for bodies already weakened by cold and hunger. The Soviet ski troops moved like ghosts through the birch forest. 40 men on wooden skis, white camouflage suits making them invisible against snow. They carried PPSH-41 submachine guns, 750 rounds per minute cyclic rate. The weapons functioned in temperatures that turned German small arms into clubs. Zimmermann felt his lungs burn with each breath. The column moved at 2 kilometers per hour through knee-deep snow. Behind him, men began to fall. Frostbite cases. Exhaustion. 3 soldiers sat down in the snow and refused to move. The canvas coffins stood empty behind them. 40 tons of German logistics capability abandoned to the Russian winter. The trucks would freeze solid within hours, their metal frames cracking in the cold. When the ski troops opened fire, the Germans had no cover, no vehicles to shelter behind, no heavy weapons to return fire. Just 40 men in summer uniforms, standing in an open field, dying 1 bullet at a time. The Panzer V Panther weighed 45 tons when it rolled out of the MAN factory in Nuremberg. In the forests outside Kaluga, it weighed nothing. The transmission had seized. The final drive had cracked. The steel tracks lay twisted in the snow like broken vertebrae. Hauptfeldwebel Werner Kessler crouched behind the dead tank's glacis plate. His Karabiner 98K felt alien in his hands. The bolt was stiff with frost. The trigger guard bit through his gloves. 3 days ago, he commanded a platoon of 4 Panthers. Now he commanded 16 infantry with rifles that barely functioned and winter clothing that didn't exist. The Soviet Guards Rifle Division had materialized at dawn. Not the mindless horde the propaganda films promised. These men moved with tactical precision that made Kessler's stomach turn. They advanced in bounds. They used dead ground. They exploited every piece of cover between the tree line and the German position. At 150 yards, the rifle grenades started falling. The Soviet RG-42 fragmentation grenades detonated with sharp metallic cracks. Shrapnel rang off the Panther's armor like steel rain. Kessler's radio operator screamed into the handset. No response. The divisional artillery net had gone silent 12 hours ago. Senior Lieutenant Pavel Orlov watched the fascists through his PU scope. The German infantry clustered around their broken tanks like children around their mothers. Pathetic. The Great Wehrmacht reduced to this. Men with frozen weapons hiding behind machines that couldn't move. His rifle company had trained for this moment. Urban combat in Stalingrad had taught them to fight at ranges where German technological advantages meant nothing. The MG-42 machine gun jammed in the cold. The Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons misfired when the propellant froze. German winter uniforms were a cruel joke. Canvas boots, cotton gloves, wool coats designed for garrison duty in Berlin. Orlov's men wore Valenki felt boots and padded telogrykas. They carried PPSH-41 submachine guns, that fired in temperatures that killed German weapons. They advanced through snow that immobilized German armor. Every tactical advantage belonged to them now. The rifle grenades fell in precise patterns. Orlov's grenadiers had studied the weak points of German armor. The Panther's engine, deck, the commander's cupola, the vision ports. They didn't need to penetrate the armor. They needed to kill the men hiding behind it. Kessler watched his platoon disintegrate. Gefreiter Hoffmann took shrapnel in the throat. Obergefreiter Schmidt tried to run and made it 6 steps before a rifle grenade burst caught him in the open. The Soviet advance was methodical, professional. They moved like men who understood their business. The German deserter reports would later describe Soviet tactics as exploiting equipment weaknesses with surgical precision. The mindless Asiatic horde was a fantasy. These Guards rifle divisions fought with the calculated brutality of men who had learned their trade in the ruins of their own cities. Kessler's carabiner clicked empty. His fingers were too numb to reload. Around him, 45 tons of German engineering sat silent in the snow. The myth of Panzer invincibility had frozen to death in a Russian forest. The war machine was breaking down one seized transmission at a time. The rifle grenades kept falling. The snow fell in thick curtains across the Cagnutino sector. 467 T-34s formed up in the pre-dawn darkness. Each tank carried 76 rounds for its 76.2 millimeter gun. The steel was cold enough to burn skin. Colonel Dmitry Vasiliev climbed onto the lead T-34's hull. The metal rang like a bell under his boots. His Guards tank regiment had been waiting for this moment since the first German panzers rolled through the wheat fields 6 months ago. Now the fascists were freezing in their holes. Their vaunted armor sat immobilized. Tracks cracked. Engines seized. The Wehrmacht's summer war machine was dying in the winter mud. "Comrades," Vasiliev's voice cut through the wind. "Today we show these invaders what Soviet steel can do." The T-34s moved out at 0530 hours, 35 tons each. Christie suspension absorbing the impact of frozen ground. The Guards formations advanced in echelon, companies spread across 2 kilometers of front. No radio chatter, hand signals only. The sound of 400 diesel engines was thunder rolling across the steppe. The German line was 12 kilometers ahead. Intelligence reported scattered strongpoints, Panzer IIs and a handful of assault guns, infantry huddled in improvised bunkers, no coordinated defense. The Wehrmacht was fragmenting under the cold. Senior Lieutenant Boris Antonov commanded the lead tank. His driver, Sergeant Fedorov, had learned to read terrain like scripture. The T-34 climbed a low ridge. Antonov raised his periscope. German positions spread below them like a broken necklace. Foxholes connected by communication trenches. Steam rising from exhaust vents, where desperate men burned anything that would catch fire. "Target, Panzer, bearing 045, range 800 meters. The gunner traversed left. The 76.2 millimeter gun swung like a pointing finger. High explosive shell loaded. The T-34's suspension settled as it stopped. "Fire!" The gun bucked. Cordite smoke filled the turret. The German panzer erupted in orange flame. Secondary explosions as ammunition cooked off. Black smoke climbing into the gray sky. The breakthrough began. 467 T-34s poured through the gap. Guards rifle divisions followed in their wake. The German line collapsed in sections. Strongpoints bypassed, communication severed. The fascist defense became isolated pockets of desperate men watching Soviet armor flow around them like floodwater. In his command bunker, Hauptmann Friedrich Weber watched the attack develop through field glasses. The scope of it staggered him. This wasn't the ragtag Red Army of 6 months ago. These were professional formations, coordinated, disciplined. The tanks moved with purpose. Infantry followed proper spacing. Artillery fell exactly where it was needed. Weber's hands shook. Not from cold. From the growing realization that everything they'd been told about Soviet capabilities was wrong. These weren't Asiatic hordes. These were soldiers. Good soldiers. Better than good. His radio crackled. All units, all units. Conduct fighting withdrawal to secondary positions. Weber looked at his map. The secondary positions were 18 kilometers behind them. The T-34s would be there in 2 hours. The Iron Truth was rolling west. Soviet armor, Soviet tactics, Soviet winter. The Wehrmacht's assumptions were burning in the snow. The Wehrmacht's technological superiority was supposed to matter. Advanced optics on the Panzer IV, precision engineering in the MG-42's 1,200 rounds per minute cyclic rate, radio communication systems that coordinated combined arms operations with surgical precision. None of it functioned at -38 degrees Celsius. The fundamental question haunting German command wasn't tactical, it was philosophical. Could industrial excellence overcome environmental reality? Could technological overmatch defeat strategic depth when the machines stopped working? General Major Franz Halder's staff calculated the mathematics obsessively. German forces possessed qualitative superiority in every measurable category: tank armor, artillery accuracy, radio coordination, individual soldier training. The Wehrmacht's doctrine emphasized speed, concentration, and technological advantage. Blitzkrieg worked because German equipment functioned better than enemy equipment. But Soviet doctrine assumed equipment would fail. The Red Army's operational planning incorporated massive redundancy, multiple rifle divisions where Germans deployed single panzer regiments, human couriers when radio networks collapsed, manual artillery calculation when rangefinders froze. The doctrinal assumption was simple. Technology breaks, men endure. Colonel Ivan Fedorov commanded the 3rd Guards Motor Rifle Division's intelligence section. His reports to Stavka emphasized a critical observation. German tactical excellence depended entirely on mechanical reliability. Remove the machines, and German infantry fought like any other infantry. Often worse. Their winter clothing was inadequate. Their logistics system prioritized fuel over food. Their individual survival training assumed technological support that no longer existed. Fedorov's interrogation reports documented systematic German equipment failures. Panzer IV transmissions seizing at -20 degrees. MG-42 mechanisms jamming after 200 rounds in sub-zero conditions. Radio batteries dying within 4 hours of exposure to Siberian wind. The vaunted German war machine was literally freezing to death. The Soviet perspective was coldly analytical. German soldiers possessed superior individual equipment when that equipment functioned. The Gewehr 43 semi-automatic rifle outperformed the Mosin-Nagant bolt action in controlled conditions, but controlled conditions didn't exist. The Mosin-Nagant fired reliably after being buried in snow for 6 hours. The Gewehr 43 required constant maintenance that frontline conditions made impossible. Soviet tactical doctrine evolved to exploit these mechanical vulnerabilities. Guards rifle companies carried entrenching tools, not because they planned to dig in, but because frozen ground required manual excavation when mechanical diggers failed. They carried extra ammunition, not for sustained firefights, but because resupply assumed pack animals when trucks couldn't start. Every tactical decision incorporated the assumption that technology would prove unreliable. The strategic implications were devastating for German planning. Operation Barbarossa's timeline assumed mechanical mobility. Panzer spearheads advancing 30 kilometers per day. Motorized infantry maintaining operational tempo. supply columns delivering ammunition and fuel on schedule. Winter weather reduced German mobility to walking pace, while Soviet forces maintained operational effectiveness. Halder's staff wrestled with an uncomfortable conclusion. German tactical superiority was conditional. It required specific environmental parameters. Remove those parameters and German advantages evaporated. Soviet tactical doctrine was unconditional. It assumed worst-case scenarios and planned accordingly. The question that haunted German strategic planning was simple. Could technological excellence overcome environmental adaptation when the environment itself became the enemy? The winter of 1941 was providing a brutal answer. Heinz Guderian stared at the dispatch from Army Group Center. The numbers told a story his tactical genius couldn't rewrite. Supply woes were the main cause of hardship preventing the advance on Moscow. Not Soviet resistance, not weather, logistics. The Panzer general who had revolutionized armored warfare watched his doctrine collapse in the Russian winter. His Mark IV tanks, the backbone of Blitzkrieg, sat frozen in fields like metal tombstones. Transmission casings cracked at -28 degrees Celsius. Engine blocks split when coolant turned to ice. The vaunted Maybach HL engines, producing 300 horsepower in French summers, produced nothing in Russian winters. Guderian's tactical innovations meant nothing when the machines couldn't move. They coordinated tank infantry artillery attacks that had shattered Poland, and France required mobility. Speed, concentration of force at the decisive point. His panzers were designed to advance 30 kilometers per day across firm ground, with reliable supply lines stretching back to German railheads. Instead, they crawled at walking pace through knee-deep snow. The Zimmerit anti-magnetic paste coating their hulls cracked in the cold. Rubber road wheels shattered. Drive sprockets seized. Tank commanders who had led from the front now abandoned their vehicles and marched with the infantry. The MG-42 machine guns, capable of 1,200 rounds per minute in temperate conditions, jammed after 50 rounds in sub-zero temperatures. The advanced Zeiss optics that gave German gunners superiority at range fogged with condensation that froze instantly. Radio batteries died within 3 hours of exposure to Siberian wind. From the Soviet perspective, watching the German war machine freeze to death felt like divine intervention. Senior Lieutenant Viktor Kozlov of the 8th Guards Rifle Regiment observed German positions through his periscope binoculars. The fascists were dying without Soviet bullets killing them. Their canvas-topped trucks sat abandoned along approach routes. Their artillery pieces stood silent, hydraulic systems frozen solid. Their infantry huddled around fires that revealed their positions to Soviet mortars. Kozlov's men wore Valenki felt boots and Telegraika quilted jackets. Their Mosin Nagant rifles functioned after being buried in snow for 12 hours. Their PPSH submachine guns fired 750 rounds per minute, regardless of temperature. Soviet doctrine assumed equipment would fail. Russian soldiers carried entrenching tools, spare firing pins, and the knowledge that machines were temporary, but endurance was permanent. The Wehrmacht quartermaster reports painted the disaster in stark numbers. Horse and vehicle attrition reached 25 to 30% in the first month of Barbarossa. Over 500 frostbite cases in a single sector. Panzer groups reporting 50% immobilization rates as temperatures dropped below operational thresholds. Guderian understood the counterfactual haunting every German officer. Could Blitzkrieg have succeeded with adequate winter preparation? The tactical doctrine remained sound. Concentrated armor, coordinated air support, rapid exploitation of breakthroughs. But doctrine required functioning equipment. Strategy demanded reliable logistics. The general who had written the textbook on armored warfare learned that tactics were conditional. Environmental parameters determined whether brilliance mattered or became irrelevant. Soviet Guards divisions exploited German equipment weaknesses with surgical precision, while German tactical superiority became strategic paralysis. Winter had transformed the master of mobile warfare into a student of endurance. The lesson was brutal in its simplicity. Superior tactics meant nothing when your tanks wouldn't start. The documents arrived at SAMO headquarters in Podolsk on January 15, 1942. Combat reports from 3rd Guards Motor Rifle Division. Filed under classification level secret in Fond 208. The reports would remain buried for 57 years. Colonel Ivan Fedorov commanded the intelligence section. His job was cataloging German equipment failures for future exploitation. The reports revealed something extraordinary. Soviet Guards formations weren't just surviving German attacks. They were systematically hunting frozen Wehrmacht units like wounded animals. The first report detailed engagement protocols. Enemy Panzer Mark IV tanks exhibit transmission seizure at -28 degrees Celsius after 4 hours exposure, wrote Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Volkov. Recommend close assault during extended cold periods when German mobility is compromised. Volkov's rifle company had perfected the technique. Wait for German armor to halt due to mechanical failure. Approach from dead ground using natural concealment. Engage at ranges under 100 yards with rifle grenades and concentrated small arms fire. Target vision ports, commander's cupola, engine deck. The Germans couldn't traverse their frozen turrets fast enough to respond. The second report analyzed German logistics vulnerabilities. Wehrmacht quartermasters prioritized fuel over food in their supply calculations. German soldiers were literally starving in their positions. Enemy infantry observed eating tree bark and leather equipment, documented Lieutenant Pavel Orlov. Physical condition deteriorating rapidly. Combat effectiveness reduced by estimated 60%. Soviet doctrine assumed everything would break. Mosin-Nagant rifles functioned after 6 hours buried in snow. German Gewehr 43 semi-automatic rifles jammed after 20 rounds in sub-zero conditions. Soviet PPSH submachine guns fired 750 rounds per minute in temperatures that turned German MG-42s into frozen paperweights. The third report contained technical specifications that Wehrmacht engineers would have found terrifying. Guards rifle companies carried detailed charts of German equipment failure temperatures, Panzer transmissions, seized at -20 degrees. Radio batteries died within 4 hours of Siberian wind exposure. Hydraulic systems failed catastrophically below -15 degrees. But the most chilling document came from Senior Lieutenant Boris Antonov, 2nd Guards Rifle Regiment. His unit had observed German infantry abandoning positions not due to enemy action, but due to equipment failure. Enemy forces retreating on foot after vehicle abandonment, Antonov wrote. Personnel wearing inadequate winter clothing. Estimated casualties from exposure exceeding combat losses by ratio of 3-to-1. From the German perspective, the Soviet winter counteroffensive felt like fighting ghosts. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Schneider of the 23rd Infantry Division recorded his terror in a letter home. The Russians appear from nowhere. Our machine guns won't fire, our tanks won't move, our radios are dead. They know exactly when we're helpless. They watch us freeze and then they attack when we can't. Fight back. It's not warfare, it's execution. The archives revealed the truth. Soviet Guards divisions possessed sophisticated understanding of combined arms warfare in winter conditions. They had studied German equipment limitations for months. They knew precisely when to strike. The primitive Red Army had outthought the Wehrmacht's technological superiority through methodical intelligence gathering and tactical patience. While German planners designed for rapid summer campaigns, Soviet doctrine planned for equipment failure as an operational constant. The Winter War wasn't won by courage. It was won by engineering specifications and thermal tolerances documented in classified reports that turned German advantages into death sentences. The Wehrmacht's finest tactical minds never understood the fundamental equation. German excellence required mechanical reliability. Soviet doctrine assumed mechanical failure. Colonel Hans Dietrich commanded the 17th Panzer Division's advance elements in the Kalinin sector. January 1942. His Mark V Panthers carried 75mm guns with Zeiss optics. His grenadiers wielded STG-44 assault rifles, firing intermediate cartridges at 600 rounds per minute. His communications net spanned 40 kilometers with crystal-clear radio coordination. Perfect tactical integration. Textbook combined arms warfare. The machines stopped working at -35°C. Senior Lieutenant Alexei Petrov watched the German column through his PU scope. 3rd Guards Rifle Regiment. His men carried Mosin-Nagant rifles manufactured in 1891. Bolt action. 5-round magazines. No radios below company level. No vehicles. They moved on felt boots through knee-deep snow. Their weapons functioned at -40°. They had been fighting in winter for 6 months. The cold was their advantage. Petrov counted 16 German infantry clustered around 4 immobilized Panthers. Engine blocks cracked, transmission fluid frozen solid. The crews stood in the open arguing over repair procedures. No winter camouflage. Dark Feldblues uniforms against white snow. Perfect targets at 300 meters. The German tactical manual emphasized speed, concentration, technological superiority. Blitzkrieg doctrine assumed 30 kilometers per day advance rates, radio-coordinated artillery strikes, air support within 15 minutes, mechanical reliability across all systems. The manual never addressed sustained operations below freezing. Wagner's Quartermaster Corps prioritized ammunition over winter clothing. The panzers carried summer-weight lubricants. The infantry wore cotton gloves. Petrov's rifle company carried entrenching tools, felt boots, quilted jackets. Their doctrine assumed equipment would fail. They planned for walking wounded frozen weapons, dead radios. Every man knew field expedient repairs. Strip a Mosin-Nagant blindfolded. Clear ice from the bolt in 30 seconds. Function without resupply for 72 hours. The Red Army built redundancy into everything. From the German perspective, the situation defied comprehension. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote in his diary that night, "The Russians appear from nowhere. No vehicles, no supply lines, no heavy weapons. They move through snow that stops our panzers. They fight in temperatures that kill our engines. How do they coordinate attacks without radios? How do they resupply without trucks? They should be freezing to death. Instead, we are." The tactical reality was brutal mathematics. German combat effectiveness dropped 60% below -20°. Soviet effectiveness remained constant. The Mosin-Nagant rifle functioned after 6 hours buried in snow. The STG-44 jammed after 2 magazines in sub-zero conditions. Soviet ski troops maintained 3 kilometers per hour movement over broken terrain. German mechanized infantry moved at walking pace when their vehicles died. Petrov's company attacked at 0430 hours. No preliminary bombardment. No radio coordination. Hand signals and whistle commands. They covered 300 meters in 4 minutes. The Germans never established defensive positions. Half their weapons wouldn't fire. Their tactical superiority meant nothing when the tools of war became frozen metal. The Wehrmacht lost the war in the winter of 1941, not through courage or cowardice, through engineering tolerances and logistical assumptions. German tactical excellence was conditional on mechanical performance. Soviet tactical doctrine was unconditional. When the machine stopped, only the men remained. And the Red Army had built an entire military philosophy around that simple, terrible truth.